Mandalorian slaps. But I'm not gonna lie to you, whenever this thing showed up, I got excited because I know what it is, but I thought that was in Darth Maul's possession last. Clearly a giant gap in my Star Wars knowledge existed. And while there are probably many of those, none were so obvious to me as this one. I had not finished the final season of the Clone Wars, and I had never watched a second of Star Wars Rebels. I just didn't really have any interest in a Disney Channel children's cartoon that came out after I had already graduated from high school. But my excuses no longer mattered. Rebels became more relevant, and after all these years, I've finally gone back and seen it all. And to my surprise, if you are a lifelong Star Wars fan like me, I think the show is actually a must-watch. So, Star Wars Rebels is a weird show to watch right after you just finished the Clone Wars, which you should watch by the way, in chronological order. Don't make the same mistake I did, as this show kicks ass right at the end. It kind of sucks that it had to basically be cancelled and then finish after Rebels had already taken its entire course, because the tonal dissonance between these two shows is kind of big. The Clone Wars is a cinematic war story that ends with the fall of the Jedi, and Rebels is kind of a light formulaic romp that takes place in the aftermath of those tragic events. Because the Clone Wars really matured as a show and still had fairly mature themes even at its start, it honestly made Rebels pretty difficult to watch at first. With a young teen lead that's going through a very basic hero's journey, connecting to the main character when you're not a kid anymore is interesting. Luckily, a delightful crew picks him up and takes him on a sizable tour of the Star Wars universe. The sampler plate of journeys, if you will, as Ezra learns to be a Jedi as well as a hero of the rebellion, complete with a love interest and mentor figure, all glued together with the temptation of the dark side, of course. The show really starts in the second season though, as the first is, well, let's just get into it. Lothal. Desolate and blank. Not a desert planet for once, but somehow infinitely less interesting. Seriously, apart from the opening episode, the first massive chunk of the series takes place on this ultra generic planet with backgrounds that are either recycled a lot or some poor guy had a very tedious job. My immediate first impression of the show was how much of a step back it was from the Clone Wars visually, production-wise, even voice work-wise. As much as I like Steve Blum's voice, I kept hearing it on too many characters early on. He's fun on Zeb, but he's like 65 or more % of all stormtroopers, and it's just kind of weird. To make things a little worse, the characters don't quite progress at the same rate, as Kanan and Ezra get the bulk of that pretty early on. You start to learn a lot very fast about these two, and the other characters kind of get left behind. And then Lando shows up, weirdly, and other semi-cool but semi-strange cameos, but yeah, binge watching the first season felt a little bit like homework, unfortunately. And then season 1 ends with and 2 starts with and then the show starts picking up some pace. You get a lot of cool clone stuff, which almost looks weird when you see it during the time of the Empire. And then the show starts to feel more like an actual sequel to the Clone Wars, as well as a nice bridger, pun intended, to the original trilogy. But of course, it does still have that sort of Disney sugary feel. What makes things even stranger is the fact that there's some pretty dark stuff going on a lot of the time. Anyone who doesn't like the Empire is in a pretty bad place, ranging from being on the run to straight up imprisoned or enslaved. You also have edgy Hot Topic employees hired to seek out and slaughter any Jedi or really any Force-sensitive being they come across, but it's alright. Look at the funny babies they're trying to kill. I admire the fact that Filoni and crew clearly tried to keep this as embedded in the time and place that it's happening in, so when the show starts to pour on the sprinkles, I definitely can't blame them. Just kind of feels wonky tonally to me at times. Either way, at this point, the show has become much more watchable, and I'm pretty invested. One of the most shocking things I've come to realize is the character I ended up enjoying the most is probably Hera. She's the captain of the Ghost, love the ship name, and little transport, the Phantom, by the way. I just feel like we see a lot of Jedi characters or larger-than-life people, so when you give me a Twi'lek base pilot destined to take to the skies with a family history embedded in the Clone Wars who's a true rebel, it makes me pretty interested. Light spoilers ahead. I recommend sticking around, they're not a huge deal to the story. There's a time skip between seasons 2 and 3. I don't much consider this a spoiler though. Just when I thought I couldn't really care about Ezra less, he gets a bit older, a bit crappier, and possibly even more basic. His design kinda devolves, making him just look kinda like any old protagonist. This is contrasted by the other characters who are getting a lot more to actually do and are developing quite nicely. Kanan gains a new level of wisdom wisdom much closer to that of a true Jedi Knight. Hera has a lot of background shown, same even with Zeb, and now new hints at Sabine's Mandalorian history begin to unravel. At least Ezra has a proper lightsaber now though. There are of course still the usual formulated filler episodes even into this season, which unavoidably plagues the series. This is technically also an issue with the Clone Wars, but at least that series had a much more cinematic feel and a bit more serious tone. I found Rebels filler to be pretty by the numbers, and that homework type of feel still kind of lingered around a bit. It's cool to see people like Hondo, but I don't even really remember what exactly he was doing in those episodes. Luckily, things change in a hurry when Thrawn enters the scene. My knowledge of Thrawn was pretty minimal, possibly like some of you who might be watching this. I knew he was something of a pretty legendary Star Wars Legends character, and he had been folded into the canon. What I didn't know was that Thrawn is one of the coolest Imperial characters I have ever come across. He's basically one step ahead of the Rebels most of the time, and he actually feels like a real threat compared to a lot of these other by-the-numbers Imperial leaders. He seems to antagonize pretty much anyone, and he's so fun to hate. The back half of Season 3 is absolutely stacked. This is where we finally get Darksaber action and history, more Clone Wars cameos, seeds of the start of the Rebel Alliance, and episode 20 becomes easily the best episode for me. You might know the one. The final season of Rebels followed much of what the rest of the show set up. I found it technically less engaging than Season 3 though. Luckily, it wraps up pretty nicely and leaves loads of room for future stories while closing up some of the gaps for me. Rebels is a good time. For as formulaic as it can sometimes be, it has plenty of truly beautiful Star Wars moments, some that I think need to be seen by any hardcore fan. It plays it safe a lot of the time, but it isn't afraid to go dark or sad at times. It is a worthy enough companion piece to the Clone Wars, and if you're like me and have to expand your knowledge in the universe but just didn't really feel like checking Rebels out for whatever reason, you should. I'm genuinely shocked how much I grew to really enjoy these characters and even look forward to their possible return, especially if that's a live action return. Anyways, these have been my thoughts on Rebels after not watching it for 6+ years. Yeah, I think I missed out. Kind of wish at times that I could go back and just tell myself to suffer through it. And I know that sounds kind of mean, but you have to understand when this came out, I wasn't really gonna sit down and watch a kids show. You know, that's just kind of how it was. Luckily, it does kind of have that Clone Wars thing where it's not 100% a kids show. You know, anybody can watch this, of course. It's just there's some episodes you gotta kind of grind through, but it's worth the grind. I think you should check it out. And yeah, hope you have a good one.
A new beginning.